this is Scott Taylor, and thank you for being with us in the Afterlife Files. Today's guest is the acclaimed spiritual medium and popular author, Carole Obley. She has been the bridge between heaven and earth in more than 14,000 group and individual readings. An advanced intuitive, Carole delivers specific, practical guidance in readings about relationships, businesses, and spirituality. In our interview today, she has 3 points I think are worth paying attention to. The first one is if you are a sensitive person or wanted to be a medium or just curious about what it's like to be a medium and have that lifestyle, she lists 5 things that help her to be in that space and be professional in what it is that she does. So see if you can list off the 5. Just check them off as they go along. Second thing is that she spends a little bit of time talking about what it's like to not judge what comes through. Because, a medium wants to be able to take information that's given to her and deliver it in as clear a fashion as possible, not coloring it with, our own personal memories or how we view the world or judgments about this, that, and the other thing. They want to be able to really give the listener, the person who's requesting this mediumship talent, to get the information in a way that is clear so that they can really understand what's being conveyed. So I think that's worth paying attention to. And third, there is one message above all the others that Carole says that comes through time and time again. Teaser, it's not what I expected. See if it's what you expect. So this is our interview with Carole Obley, and we'll see you on the flip side. Well, hi, Carole. Welcome to the Afterlife Files.
Hi, Scott. Thanks so much for having me.
I've been looking forward to this interview, so you're like a special treat.
Oh, well, thank you.
So you have an interesting story in terms of how you got into mediumship. Give us the lowdown. Tell us your story.
I'm going to make it I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version. I've known for a long time that I've done this in previous existences. I was not aware of that when I was a child. However, many years ago, I started studying astrology, and I've had a lot of years of study of astrology. And I looked at my birth chart, and so when I was learning that, I saw that, yeah, there's a predisposition here. I certainly was not aware of that. Ironically, when I was young, I was really afraid of death. I was really afraid. In fact, in the books that I've written, I talk about the experience of walking through the graveyard by my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, a graveyard with her, and being very curious as a child, looking at the gravestones. And it was a Catholic cemetery, so they had photographs on them, and some of them were of children. And I was extremely precocious, always have been, of wanting to know what's underneath the surface. Where is this person now? I'm looking at their photograph. This was from the early 1900s. Where are they? Do they know I'm standing here on their grave? And so, even as a child, I was very curious about things that were unexplained or the paranormal. So many years went by. Long story short, I got into a lot of trouble with addiction, drugs, and alcohol. And that was, however, a catalyst for that put me squarely on this pathway. One of the catalysts. The second one was a fire that burned me out of the business that I was currently doing. And for almost a year, I was very much left directionless. That was when I was in my 30s. So almost 30 years ago, I've been doing mediumship, well over 14,000. I think I need to change my website. It's probably closer to 15,000 at this point. Um, in the beginning, I opened very, very quickly through training. Any medium who is worth their salt has done training, extensive training. I still take training virtually. I do not think that anyone working in this field can rest on their laurels. There's constant refinement. So the door was opened for me as a result of, and you probably have heard other mediums say this, the result of something sort of catastrophic in my case. Addiction set me on to questioning my spirituality. And then secondly, this fire many years later into sobriety. Um, really looking at what am I supposed to be doing in life? And I remember talking to spirit or higher source or God, saying, can you just tell me what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, can somebody come down and manifest here and say, Carole Obley, this is the direction your job, this is what your career is supposed to be. Because once I was burned out by the fire, I did not know. And I started taking classes at a metaphysical center here near Pittsburgh, PA, and a small town where I live. And so I started taking all kinds of classes. I did many years of hands-on healing, highly trained in spiritual healing and Reiki master and all of that. Then speaking mediumship began to make itself known through me, through my conduit. And since then, it's just been beyond my wildest expectations of connecting with people all over the US, in other countries. I am filled with gratitude for being on the pathway and working for spirit. So unlike some mediums you've probably spoken with, or mediums I've watched interviews on YouTube and so forth, I was not aware of this ability when I was young. I was actually very afraid of death. When my first grandparent passed in the late 60s, I remember absolutely being horrified when I went into the funeral home, and it was my grandfather, and I was a girl. I was only 10 at that time. And I remember looking at his hands in the casket and being really afraid to touch him, or I had nightmares, after that, of seeing the body and so forth. So it was really ironic that I've come into this field of connecting people with the spirit world. But I believe spirit is the transformative catalyst in all of our lives. Doesn't matter, you can be anybody. And surrendering to spirit and how spirit can mold you and shape you into a service of whatever that might be.
So, how do spirits communicate with you during these sessions?
Um, from the ground point of the sense of clairsentience, which means clair is from the French, it means clear. Sentience is feeling or sensing. Your listeners have probably heard of clairvoyance, which is seeing. Clairaudience is listening or hearing. Clairsentience it's an impression. And so it's much like, I use the analogy that if I held up a painting to you and I had it covered with a cloth, and I say, when I take this cloth off, I want you to give me your gut impression of the scene in this painting. And so when I do that and you go, oh, that makes me feel really serene. The colors are very vivid. I feel enlivened by this. Or maybe sadness, or maybe you feel very happy. that is an example, that's an analogy of how the information comes to me. And clairvoyance and clairaudience arise from clairsentience.
I
So,
remember the first time it was by accident. I was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and I rounded the corner, and there was Picasso's Guernica, and it literally knocked me off my feet. It was just so powerful. So I get that, and I appreciate how it, that kind of a message can really leave an impression on you, and it's not verbal. It's something else. So,
yeah,
what kind of information is imparted when you get these impressions?
well, um, anything you can think of, but what is really important in evidentiary mediumship is identification first. And I operate this way. The very first impression that I get from the communicating spirit is what I follow. Because for mediumship to occur, there must be a blending. What do I mean by that? A blending of the soul of the spirit communicator, that person, that soul in the spirit world, with my soul. And I'm here in a physical body, obviously, but the soul is multidimensional. I'm not sure we have a concept of what that really means. But in order for mediumship to occur, the blending phenomena must happen. And so that initial impression is what I go with. I just came off of a reading. Father came through. I will often feel this is a father figure. This is a mother figure. This is a contemporary brother, sister, cousin, or a friend, or a child, a younger a soul who passed at a younger age. And then in this particular instance, the gentleman was showing me all this military memorabilia.
That's
And so that
interesting.
was the very first impression. And I said, there's a father figure here. He's showing me a whole array of military memorabilia. Bingo. She goes, that's my father-in-law. We were just going through his photographs. He had been in World War II. And these were black and white photos. And they had all his pins and badges and so forth. And then he wanted to tell that story of, being in the military, and also his character came through from that. And so, with one simple piece of evidence, the spirit communicator will tell their story. And there is always a need on the behalf of the spirit communicator, or they wouldn't show up. It's that simple. The need might be as simple as, I go on. I'm not dead. Don't speak of me as if I'm dead. I go on. I'm very much alive. To issues of forgiveness. That's a big one. I've written in all of my books about the forgiveness being a cornerstone of healing. To a message about someone in the family on the physical plane that is ill and that they're sending prayer. They're giving awareness of that person's illness. They're always centered in the spirit communicator is some aspect of comfort and healing and love.
So, what's the message that you get most of the time? Your number one top favorite hit.
This sounds really peculiar, maybe, a little bit funny. There is an afterlife.
Oh, really?
And I have
I
had,
didn't expect that.
what, this is my most recent. I have a new book coming out next year, Wisdom from the Spirit World. Um, there are 10 lessons in that book. And that's number one. That's the number one lesson. There is an afterlife. Because interestingly, I'll share this with you. It's really cool. I have done readings for people, and the initial connection with the contact with the spirit communicator, and oftentimes in readings there's more than one. If it's a full-length reading, there's more than one. In group readings, there's usually one main communicator. So they will come through and they'll say, there's nothing to be afraid of. It's a very peaceful place here. And just by giving a simple message like that, that can alleviate a lot of fear with people. Now, interestingly, what I was about to say, I've done readings for people in which there was someone who was an atheist and they died.
Right?
I don't know that when I'm doing the reading because I go in blind. I don't want to know anything. I'm a blank slate. That's how I want it. I actually have on my website, please don't give information because I still do my own appointments. I mean, I run my whole business on my own. That's just the way I am. So there was a gentleman who came through and I said, I got a man here. He's a contemporary, very close to you. He's showing himself physically close to you, probably a significant other. She says, yes. I said, he's showing me a stack of books. She starts laughing. She goes, oh my God, that's my fiance. He was a voluminous reader. He was very rationally oriented. And I said, yeah, and he didn't believe in this, did he? He didn't believe in an afterlife. And she said, and I said, you know what he's saying to you? You were right. And she started laughing again. And I said, can I just ask why you're laughing? She said, we always had discussions about that. She said, we always had discussions on whether we go on after death. And he was very uncertain about that. He really didn't believe that. He was very rationally oriented, symbolized by this stack of books. Although literally, this gentleman read a lot of books in life. So I find that very intriguing. That's just one of many from my thousands of case files of people who, they're like, nah, I would never go see a medium. I would never, I don't believe there's a heaven. I think when we die, that's just it. So that is a very simple message, lesson, but it's a very basic one. And sometimes, Scott, it is given that way that the person will come through with what I call these little psychic type messages. Like, for example, your dad is here. He's saying that somebody in the family is remodeling their kitchen. Oh, that's my sister. She's remodeling her kitchen. And so, is that a really important thing? No, but it's dad going, my consciousness is still aware. And I see that my daughter is, doing something with her home. She's remodeling. So even these little type of psychic sort of things can lead great evidence, give great evidence to that recipient of the reading.
So I can sense that, some people don't want to go to a medium because they're thinking, oh, well, these answers are just so generic that, they could apply to anybody. But you use the term evidential mediumship, which I come to take from that is that, all right, Mr. Soul, you've got to prove yourself that you are who you are. Do I have that right?
Yes, although what I do, I do not, I've completely changed my approach of being 100% receptive. What do I mean? Well, we know what receptive is. It means we're passive, we receive. I no longer ask questions of the spirit communicator. What I do is surrender. Reading start, I always say a prayer. I have not changed the prayer in 30 years. The prayer is the same. That focuses everything in. I sit there and allow that connection to take place by way of that blending. and I don't question it. I don't, demand certain answers. I surrender. And what I find is the spirit communicator will tell their story. And in the evidence given, the message to the recipient is embedded in the evidence.
I,
So,
I could see where, like, the remodeling. I mean, you wouldn't pick out of the zillion things you could have picked in the air. You wouldn't pick my sister is, remodeling her kitchen. So in the story is the evidence.
it's the evidence, but there's also oftentimes symbolism and metaphor. Um, let's say dad comes through. Oh, there's a dad figure here. He's showing me a fishing rod. Yes, he always went fishing. He loved to fish. And then dad goes on a little bit more. And then I'm impressed with dad is saying, go out and enjoy yourself, go out into nature. It could be that the recipient has been closed in, the recipient maybe is depressed. And dad is coming through and using that piece of evidence from, yeah, I used to enjoy going out in nature by myself in the quiet and fishing. And in that piece of evidence, which was a fact of his life, he's saying to his loved one who's getting the reading, you need to go out and enjoy nature. This will be healing for you. So I find that embedded within the evidence that is given from the spirit communicator, that there is a wealth of meaning. Even in it's just it's always astonishing to me. I mean, I learn every reading that I do. I learn something and about the communication, the flow of it. And importantly, my intent is always, always, always serving the spirit world first, the client also coming into that. But my obligation, first and foremost, is to those in spirit. That's their lifeline. It's sort of like if you were on a desert island and you were there for a long time and you look out onto the ocean and you see a ship going by and you start waving and, maybe setting off a flare, who knows? I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. That's what it's like for them, that somebody can hear them. And by the way, that does not in any way mean that I'm superior to anyone. I never, ever, you will never hear me use the word gifted, never, because I believe this is a skill that I happen to have a predisposition for, but I've spent many years developing. So it's about service and it's about giving the best as the conduit that I can to alleviate some type of suffering or, issue that the recipient of that reading has.
So I get that it's healing for those who are in the non-physical. It's healing for those that are in the physical because maybe, like you were saying, they're wondering about, is dad okay? But I'm sure after all these readings, you've seen any number of ways that people can heal from this communication. Talk to me about that.
Well, I think an often overlooked uh, value of mediumship, and by the way, I have never promoted mediumship as a cure-all. It isn't. It is not. It is one tool in a toolbox that you can use in addition to maybe going to psychological counseling, therapy, maybe meditating, prayer. People who use spiritual tools move along the pathway much easier than those who don't. Um, so it's the overlooked part is if I share your father, for example, coming through and what he's saying to you and very accurate things and things that are meaningful to you, that it's your father. and that he's aware of your life and the relationship, importantly, the relationship between you and your dad. There's a facet of you understanding I'm an eternal soul. My dad goes on, you've given me a lot of evidence that, yeah, that's my dad. I know it's him. You know, you described his personality, you talked about his hobbies, you talked about the memories and all of this. But there's also what you absorb, what the recipient absorbs of knowing that they too are an eternal soul that is indestructible.
So,
So I don't hear a lot of people talking about that. And I think that it's often overlooked because I will tell you that since I've been doing this work over almost 3 decades, I absolutely have no fear of death whatsoever. And I mean, compared to, what I said at the beginning, that I was very fearful of death, this has healed me of just being the conduit to the point of I'm actually, not that I don't love my life, but I actually look forward to going back home. I've been very blessed to have glimpses of the spirit world and what it's like there. And
so we, here in the US, we live in a predominantly Christian culture. And with its emphasis on life after death, you would think that people wouldn't be so afraid, but clearly that's true. What's going on for folks?
well, I think it's the fear of the unknown because, I mean, I'm sure anybody you've interviewed that's done mediumship or anyone who's really immersed in being on their life pathway of being a medium. I've gotten scathing emails, I've gotten ridicule, I've gotten a lot of things. Does that faze me? Nope, not anymore. 'Cause I
Nope.
know that that's real. I know it's real. But I think people, the rational mind goes, well, I can't touch that. I can't see it. I can't hear it. So it doesn't exist. And so it really goes into the realm of the unknown. And, but you do know that the number one fear people have is of public speaking. Number one fear. So I guess there is something that trumps death. But yeah, a lot of people I think are afraid of that. And mediumship also helps people, in that way, as I stated earlier, to not fear that. And because it's actually a sacred process of dying. If someone passes very quickly, of course, they don't have that process. But there's the process of acclimation too in the spirit world, the adjustment to being without the body.
So that begs the question of, what upon transition from the physical body, what do you see as the journey of the soul?
Well, and I'm going to hold up another book here just
Oh,
so
good.
um, I'm still with you. True stories of healing grief through spirit communication. This was my second book that I wrote. The second chapter in that book is called Death, colon, a beginning. Death, a beginning. So it's a whole, it's like being born, but it's back into our natural state. This is sort of an unnatural state, whereas most people think being, in the spirit world is unnatural. No, it's the opposite. At least that's what I have experienced. Everything I talk about in interviews and in my books is what I have experienced. The truth as it's been revealed to me through thousands of sessions. So you've probably heard about the life review. I mean, I'm sure probably a lot of your listeners have heard about that. And that's true. We do get the life review. everything from birth to the moment of passing over. And so that consciousness that we have at the time of death is what we take with us. We don't automatically become, an angelic being, that's
Oh
sitting
no,
playing,
really?
playing.
I was.
Yeah,
Hey, I paid my dues, Carole.
I'm sorry I bursted your bubble on that or rained on your parade. But we do go to the corresponding level of consciousness that matches the one that we had at the time of death. So someone that, for example, Charles Manson or something, or Hitler, they're not going to go to the upper levels of the spirit world. Because the higher you go, and I'm talking now in terms of frequency, I'm talking in terms of consciousness, which is what? Well, the English language is kind of, you know, bereft of terms to use, but what I'm speaking about is our spiritual consciousness. So we will go to the corresponding level that matches that. Why? Because of the natural law of attraction, not the one you read about, like The Secret, which I'm sure is valid, but I'm talking about what you put out is what is drawn to you. That is a natural law. There are 7 natural laws. So it's always in effect, no matter what you do. Karma is one of them. So when we get the life review, we go, okay, let's see. I signed up. And by the way, in wisdom from the spirit world, this first one I held up, the whole first section is called You Signed Up for This.
Yep.
That's the first section. And it talks about the soul, and I'm kind of working backwards here, but they're all interrelated. The soul chooses, focuses. I call them blueprints. They're blueprints. And sort of this outline for what experiences do I need when I go into the physical plane that are going to advance me spiritually? And some of these aren't fun. I mean, some of them are quite painful. Certainly, and I don't want anyone listening to think, well, that's crazy. Why would I sign up for abuse? Why would I sign up to have an alcoholic father or mother or whatever? And so on a conscious level, you would not. But on a soul level, there are opportunities embedded that are only available through certain experiences. And
Yep.
so when we go back on upon death, when we go back to the spirit world, we look at those blueprints and we go, did I get a B in that topic? There's a section in Wisdom from the Spirit World called the Soul's Report Card.
I love it. The report card. Okay.
Report card. And guess who gives the grades? Not
Uh,
the teacher. We give them to ourselves. And during this life review, Scott, we're looking and we're going, um, okay, I wanted to learn compassion this time. And how did I do on that? So I look at and I feel and experience, and this is really important to understand. I not only see how I might have exuded compassion, or maybe not, but I also experience how what I did, the actions I took, what I said, what I was thinking, how that affected other people. And I not only see that, I feel it. So if I was really nasty to somebody, I will see that, I will feel that. How did that make that person feel? On the other hand, I've had this happen in readings where a soul will come through and, say the person, the recipient of the reading worked in healthcare. And these are real stories I'm telling you that have happened. And the person, let's say, they were just they weren't a nurse, but they were like a nurse's aide or something. And they extended compassion or a hand, or they just sat with an elderly person that didn't have a family. And that person comes through from spirit and they go, I'm not your family, but that really meant something to me when you sat with me and you didn't say anything, but you just sat there with me. And so when we have our life review, we will see every minute detail of what we did when we were here.
Yeah. So,
So it's very sobering, actually, when you think about it.
and quite a gift to be able to look at something and know how that affected another person as well as how it affected you.
I absolutely, absolutely, I believe it is a gift and it's there for a purpose. It's there so that we can have, the spirit world is total transparency. You don't go there and go, well, I'm going to put my mask on and be somebody who I'm not. That is not possible in the spirit world.
Yeah.
There is a transparency, and it's actually shown in the amount of light that radiates from the soul. So if there's a relatively dim light, we know that that soul may not have evolved a lot in that lifetime, or maybe they were a bad person. In other words, and on the opposite end of that spectrum, a huge bright light. And I've actually seen that, not in every reading, but certainly there have been many readings I've seen it, that the individual coming through is showing this intense white light. And I'll say to the sitter, or the recipient of the reading, wow, your aunt was like a saint. She was a very generous, very good person. And they'll say, yeah, she was. She did a lot of work for the church or, the poor or whatever. So that's part of it too. We re-experience all of that. And from there, we don't do it alone. Usually our spirit team, I call them a spirit team, those souls who help us. Every human being has spirit assistance available. Most people are not aware of their own spirit guidance, but they're always there. They're always there. They help us in that process of assessment.
So you use the term blueprint. Is that the same thing as a soul map?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I use that in wisdom from the spirit world. I use that term. And actually, I'll tell you what a really good soul map is. Your astrological birth chart. If you know obviously your date of birth, the place you were born, the city and the state, or city and country or whatever, and also the time. You can look at that map. I call astrology it's a language. It's a map of the soul, and it will show you, oh, okay, like where Saturn is. Yeah, that's always been a challenge, that area of life. I feel like I'm always trudging uphill. I'm climbing the mountain. Or
Yeah.
Jupiter.
I
This is
hear we have Pluto blowing things up now. So we got to.
Yeah, Pluto is not kind. Pluto is not kind, but in the evolutionary aspect of the soul's journey, Pluto is the very important function of transformation. That's its evolutionary purpose.
Well, haven't we all heard about how we are going through a change in consciousness for the human species and for the planet? And
Yes.
it seems like Pluto's got a hand in that.
It's always operating a very, very slow moving planet. It might spend 20 years in one sign. For example, it just shifted into Aquarius. It was in Capricorn, the sign before Aquarius, for, I believe, when we had the housing crash in '08, that's when Pluto went into Capricorn. And it's highly, highly symbolic of mass consciousness. like I don't care what country you're in, what continent you're on, who you are as an individual. Pluto is generational and it's about our collective consciousness.
So, speaking of disruption and bad things happening, um, what happens to people who have made their transition and they're not very nice people? You know, where do they go? How do they, you know, how do they get better? You know, if they come in at the slow vibe level, I'm assuming there's ways for them to, you know,
Yes. And
figure things out.
you know what I've discovered? No soul is ever lost because of the indescribable, inextinguishable love of spirit. Now, I say spirit with a capital S.
Yes.
That's what most people call God. Okay, I call that spirit because that force that consciousness permeates every blade of grass, every tree, every flower, you, me, every animal, the entire planet. So there is not, that's where I differ significantly with religious teachings and also on the subject of suicide. There are certain religions that teach that someone who takes their own life will go to purgatory. I have not seen that to be true. That's been my experience. However, what there is always healing available for a soul, but it has to be the soul's desire to seek healing. And so it's sort of like here, let's use the analogy. If I go, Scott, like I really care about you and I think you're depressed. I think you need to go to see a therapist. And you go, nah, I don't want to do that. Okay. So the seed can be planted, but the willingness, the desire of the soul has to be in accordance with that. And so one of the things I've seen, and this is from many years of study also of metaphysics and the spirit world and the occult, we can stay, if you were like led a relatively bad life when you were here, you were mean to people, maybe you were, a thief or a robber or, a murderer, whatever it might have been. You could stay in that same spot in the spirit world for the equivalent of eons until you demonstrate the desire to ascend. In other words, to lift your vibration. And when I tell you there are dark levels, there are dark levels of the spirit world. The closer that you get in terms of frequency or vibration to the earth, the darker those levels are. And I mean actually in terms of light, like, turning a light bulb on. And that's why it's usually always summer in the high mid planes or the higher planes. It's usually always summer or it's very pleasant, it's warm, it's light. The
Yep.
darker levels, it's relatively ugly. I mean, it's not beautiful landscapes. Um, I don't know that I would call them hell. The hell is created from the bondage and attachment from the soul to that particular level of consciousness.
Yep. I get that. Um, so what's your sense of time over there? You said that they're there for eons, but my impression is that time doesn't work the same way in the non-physical world as it does in the physical. What do you gauge from that?
It's true what you just said. There is no time. It's always now. It's always now. That's why I've done a lot of teaching as well, and I've taught many times at Lilydale, New York, the spiritualist community, and I've done a lot of teaching on my own too. And remind people, and even during readings, I'm like, there, because somebody will go, well, that's my aunt, but she died, 40 years ago. And I'm like, so what?
Yeah.
Her spirit is eternal. Time is irrelevant. It's always right now. You will always meet spirit right here and right now. You won't meet spirit in the past. You won't meet spirit in the future. Our consciousness is right here, right now. So that's a great lesson from the spirit world. And I've actually taught people when I developed a workshop for people, because people go, how can I connect on my own? And so I feel a responsibility as a medium. You don't have to always connect with the medium. In fact, you can do some of this on your own. Take a photograph of your loved one, sit in a quiet space, have a little candle there or whatever, and you can use the photograph as a way to connect with them in that moment. And believe me, they feel that. Now, it might take, several attempts because we always doubt. The lack of trust is the number one obstacle with people in mediumship. So if you just ask them, they're usually willing to oblige. And then what I say is, give me a calling card, meaning, for example, my mother who passed 20 years ago, the only time I feel sort of a weird tingling kind of sensation on my right calf of my leg is when my mother comes in, and that hasn't been for a long time. But that's her calling card. And so people who want to do this on their own, you can ask them, sometimes it's through what's called clairalience, and that's smelling. Somebody wore a certain perfume, somebody smoked cigars, somebody loved flowers and they come in with the scent of a rose, let's say. You can
Yeah,
ask
it's
that.
true. I've got a guide that comes in and it's jasmine.
Oh,
When I smell it, I go, yep, there she is. And that
yeah.
speaking of guides, what advice do you have for people who would like to be more in communion with their guidance?
Number one thing to do, you got to get still. And by that, I mean, in this new book I have coming out called The Art of Sensing, that's going to be out next April. Um, it's how to work through difficulties using intuition. The number one thing, you will never hear spirit when you're talking, when you're noisy, when you're, constantly busy. You won't hear your guides. It's true. That, we've all heard that, the still small voice. Spirit is subtle. And so another tool, Scott, I think that people need to know about is journaling. You can actually ask a question, take a half hour out of your time, have a journal there, write a question down. In my early days of training at Delphi University in Georgia, we constantly had to write our impressions. We did photo readings of a stranger. What do you feel about this person? You look at the photo and you write down qualities or whatever. So writing is very good to bring, sort of nebulous um, impressions, because we all know, I mean, this stuff is not concrete stuff. It's subtle, it's sensing, it's, urges. I feel like I need to do this or go here or there or whatever. Writing is a very good way to, get information. And you can actually write a question and then be still for maybe 5 minutes. And you come out of that meditation or that stillness, you have your journal there, and without judging it, you write down what you received. And, you just let that flow. And that's
Yeah.
something anybody can do.
Yep, that's an easy thing to do. You just need a little time and a pencil and paper.
The easier, the better. This stuff is not rocket science where, people, we tend to complicate things. That's our rational mind. the most difficulty that we have, and I mean even in myself, surrendering. And that means it doesn't mean to be a wimp or to be vulnerable or weak. That's not what that means. But surrendering of getting our thoughts and our ego out of the way.
So I've heard stories about mediums who, when they do surrender and they finally open up and start receiving messages, it's like the floodgates, and it's like in the shower and when they're driving, it's like, ah. So did that happen to you? How do you dial it up and dial it down? What are some of the mechanics of that?
It's a switch. And any medium who is professional and who is really genuine will tell you that they can flip that switch off. I've been asked many times over the years, when you go into the grocery store, are you seeing spirits? When you go through a drive-through window or something, are you seeing? No, no. We have reality TV shows that I think it's very good that mediumship has been on television because it's opened up, you know, the concept of mediumship to millions of people. But it also has given some false information about mediumship. In fact, it's very unethical to walk up to a stranger and go, "Oh, I see, your deceased son around you," or whatever. No, you should not do that. That's an invasion of that person's private space. I mean, most people are not going to be offended. They might want to hear from their son, but still, it's a decorum that you shouldn't do. So, um, when I say my prayer, that's sort of that, then my switch comes on,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when it's flipped. Now, there are times that, particularly, I do meditation every night with headsets on before I go to sleep. There are times when I will get pre connection with readings that I'm going to do, which I have no idea who I'm seeing. Somebody comes through and I'm like, who is that? And I see them very clearly, or they tell me things and I don't know who they are. Usually it's the day before I will do a group or a reading, and there's somebody who is showing up ahead of time because, again, they don't have time. So, and I've actually sat where, not knowing anybody in a group, I will sit and invite a spirit to come and give me very specific information. And I write it down and I take the piece of paper with me to the group, and it fits. Yeah, I mean, you have to have healthy boundaries, though. That that's that certainly doesn't happen all the time with what I was saying. Um, but you can't be on all the time. We're meant to experience physical life or we wouldn't be here. You know, we're meant to know what it's like to be on the physical plane, to be in a body. Um, Certainly, I mean, I know that when I flip that switch, it's going to happen. In the old days, I was like, oh, I hope it happens, but now I'm like, no, I know it will happen. Um, So you should not be getting that. And you also have to set your own boundaries of saying, I don't want to be awakened in the middle of the night with, I hear people, they're like, oh, this spirit wakes me up at 3 a.m. and everything. I would not allow a spirit to be doing that to me. I mean, I have enough trouble sleeping as it is, but you have to have really good boundaries.
So you use prayer as your metaphorical switch on. What's your switch off?
Well, I oftentimes my spirit guides are laughing because they have to remind me to do that because I often forget. Sometimes I will actually use a gesture like cutting that.
Uh,
I do the vast majority of my readings are on Zoom or on the phone because, I'm reading for people all over the US. So, like when I get off the phone, yeah, sometimes I just do cutting that connection. Yeah. No, I've heard all sorts of things. You can go in the bathroom, wash your hands. There's a teacher I had who she would talk about washing her hands or, in between readings to disconnect. Um, you can do a mental disconnect just by saying, sometimes I'll put up like the third eye, our energy
Yeah.
right here. Sometimes if this is a window that we look through, you can pull down the shade on the window, or draw the curtains. So I think it's just a little trick that we can use that goes, I'm finished now. That's the end of that.
Speaking of finishing, we are bumping up against our time. So, two things. One is I would like to have, excuse me, I would like you to tell us about how people can get a hold of you and your products and that sort of thing. And then leave us with a final thought that will enrich our lives.
Okay. Um, so my website is soulvisions.net. And I also have Facebook page. I'm not sure if you put these up or not, but facebook.com/soul medium. And Instagram, I can't remember that right now, but I think I did. I sent that to you. So all of the books. I mean, you're not going to get an autographed copy on Amazon. That they're on Amazon. They're on Kindle. You can get them through me. I would gladly autograph them. I cannot beat Amazon's prices, even as the author. So they're all available there, and I do webinars, usually I teach in the fall and winter. It's not good to teach in the summer. People want to be outdoors. So and as far as leaving people with something, I'm just going to say this. What really struck me, we make so much of our life and we get so immersed in problems and issues and, we make them huge. And I do not even remember who said this, but I believe this, that this life that you and I are in right now is equivalent to a grain of sand on the beach. And when you think of how many grains of sand are on a beach, that's the eternity of our soul. So that puts a lot of perspective on what matters, what really matters. And also, I will tell you, as someone who's communicated with the spirit world for decades, that one of the lessons that the spirit world comes through with is our values go with us when we die.
Mm.
And not certainly not money, not property, not possessions, but the referral of values that are non-tangible. Love, service, those are the two big ones. Um, Family, anything that we treasure, loyalty, honesty, being genuine, compassion, those are all non-tangible values. So if you focus on those, on service, you'll see, and it might take a little bit of practice, but you'll see that what your mind becomes obsessed with as far as problems diminishes when you focus on those everlasting qualities.
I love that, Carole. Thank you for spending time with us today. This is terrific to have you here on the Afterlife Files.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
And for the rest of you out there, hang on for just a couple moments. I think there's some things that you're going to want to hear in my little after recap. See you soon. 3, 2, 1. All right. Let me unrecord you here. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. There was one topic that really got to me, however, and that is what happens to bad souls. She is very clear. There is no soul that is ever lost. And with the work here that we do at the Expanded Awareness Institute and the work that we did at the Monroe Institute, we would heartily concur that there is no soul that is ever lost. However, she had an interesting way of framing that question, because as she talked about the afterlife, she talked about it as, being a tiered affair where it's slow moving energy and then it rises up and there is faster moving energy up here. And wherever you are when you leave this physical world for the last time, you can enter it at different spots. That means, though, that there's different agency that happens in these various levels. Case in point, so somebody happens to enter into this really slow vibration, and they may not realize where they are and how they got there, what it's like, and what's required of them to move up is some sort of frustration, some sort of calling out, some sort of desire to move up out of this darker spot into something that has more options for them. And that typically takes, the soul saying something like, "Is this all there is? Help me, please. I want to be someplace that has more love and light," something along those lines. And when that happens, that cry for help, that recognition that there has to be something more, then it opens. And they enter into a new era of choices that allows them to be where they want to be. Case in point, I had this really interesting conversation with a soul who, when he left his physical body for the last time, his deep desire was to sing in the heavenly choir. He had been in a choir here in the physical world, and he just loved doing that. So, sure enough, he gets there and he enters into this choir. He gets to wear the robes, and they sing hymns all day, and he just has a wonderful time until he sang "Onward, Christian Soldiers" for the 4,917th time, and he just couldn't do it one more time. And he cried out, "Is this all there is?" And the heavens opened up, and he was allowed to move up and began to realize that he had options, that he could go where he wanted to go, that there was a path that was laid out for him. He had guidance to ask for help, and he got the ability to be where he wanted to be. He had agency in the non-physical realm, and that allowed him to learn and progress at his pace and become familiar with what it is that he wanted to do while he was there. So I find that fascinating. Thank you for being with us here at the Afterlife Files, and we'll see you in our next video. Bye now.